the process so that as the projects proceed, the community is already bought in, already on board. So it's, upfront investment, which is, it takes time and effort and energy. It's not always easy, but generally you'll come out the other side with a stronger, more successful outcome in the end. So really these visioning processes and discussions can bring people together. If you're like me and you get anxious about wanting to make sure that you're delivering on what you've said you'll do, or to your grantors, having a plan can really help reduce that stress, because you've thought it through, you know what you're going to do, how those dollars are being spent, who's going to do what, and that just, then you're not up at night thinking of all those things. You might be up at night thinking of other things, but it helps to have that plan in place at the beginning. And as Calista mentioned, funders want to see that you've thought through this process, that you've thought things through, who's going to be doing what and how they'll be collaborating and where the dollars are going and what the contingency plans are. All of that makes you much more fundable, if you will, because it's clear that you have a higher likelihood of success, a clearer roadmap of where you're going. And Calista mentioned the iSpark funding that's now open. There's potentially other funding available for the planning process as well, because it's a little different than maybe project-based work where you have a specific, maybe a more tangible outcome, or, whether it's an infrastructure project where you're building something, or a project deliverable. Planning, in a sense, is maybe a little bit invisible, but is, as Calista mentioned, really, really important and critical to the future success of all those other projects as well. So it's important to fund it well and put time in upfront. And the nice thing about food systems planning as it relates to food systems, food is kind of the universal connector. And from a planning perspective and our community perspective, there are so many linkages to our food systems and food sovereignty. It affects our health and wellness. It affects transportation side of things, economic development. There's so many linkages that can happen through food. So really investing in food systems planning, you're actually investing in many other community objectives as you go through that process as well. So in terms of a framework, there's a lot of different frameworks you could use. This is quite high level, but as Calista mentioned, starting at the visioning piece can be a place to start. And there's many different ways that you can do this. And one of the resources that I'll share later suggests kind of some facilitated ways that you could do this. But really it's asking yourselves the question, what does your community want their food system to look like into the future? And in some planning processes, this is time bounded and with a specific time horizon. So for example, I'm a planner. An official community plan is typically a 30-year plan. So we would say in 30 years, where do we want to be? But you might also want to be a little more aspirational and say, let's assume everything is all done and our food system is as we want it to be. What does it look like at whatever point in time that might be? So what is that ideal vision for our food system? I should interject and just mention, I'm coming from a settler background with academic training, and I'm a professional planner. Planning is, by its very nature, a colonial institution, and I'm just wanting to put that out there right away, that this is one way of seeing the world. I'm quite left-brained and linear, and I recognize that that's not always a good fit with Indigenous ways of knowing and ways of understanding the world. So I still think it's useful to understand some of these approaches and tools, partly because a lot of funders still operate within that cultural context as well. And so it's helpful to be able to speak that language and work in that framework. However, everything is going to need to be adapted to your particular cultural and community context, and you are the expert in that context. So you will know what works best and how things might fit for you. So I just wanted to put that out there right off the beginning. So after visioning, let's say you've done all the work to bring everybody together and you have a well-crafted vision of what you want your food system to look like. Next, let's look at goals. How might we actually achieve that vision? What needs to happen? What are those measurable milestones? And so when we talk about goals, you've probably heard this before, we talk about SMART goals, which is an acronym which stands for specific. So you need to make sure that the goals are detailed enough that it's clear what you're talking about. Measurable, so how can you actually tell if you're working towards achieving those? Achievable, so they can't be so aspirational that you're never likely to achieve them. Realistic, and time bounded. So how long will it take to achieve that particular goal? So setting goals is useful, and funders like to see that as well if you're able to articulate what those goals are. Once you have those goals, then you can get into the action or implementation planning. And there's many different ways that this can happen as well. And it will depend on whether you're talking about a specific project or whether you're talking about, a food system strategy. Those will look different, but essentially it's breaking down the specific tasks or steps that need to be taken to achieve those goals that you just identified, and creating a work plan. As I mentioned, I'm very linear and left brain, so the very grid-like screen capture you see is an example of a work plan kind of template that I use that has all the tasks and then the subtasks and a schedule. So this is kind of basic project planning. But really it helps to think through these, how would we actually do what we said we're going to do? What steps are needed? What resources will we need? And then the prioritization is important as well, because you won't be able to do everything all at once. And so identifying where to start is important. And that might be, you might define your priorities based on where the funding opportunities are, which might dictate specific types of activities. For example, maybe it's infrastructure funding, or maybe it's whatever the specific goal of the funding opportunity is. But there also might be priorities just based on order of operations, like we have to undertake this action first before we can undertake any of these other actions. So doing some thinking around where you'll start and a timeline of kind of how things might roll out. And then the evaluation piece is important as well. How will you measure your success? And how will you know if you're getting towards what you said you would do? And you might have already thought of that a little bit on the goals setting side of things, like those measurable metrics. But this is also really useful to funders. They would like to see that you are going to be evaluating and reevaluating where you're getting to. And then we've kind of touched on this throughout, but involving the community is really key and really important. It's not just something that funders want to see. As we mentioned, it will help you to ensure that your projects and your undertakings are successful because community members have had a chance to contribute, so they feel a sense of ownership and buy-in to what you're doing. And it also ensures that your project is an accurate reflection of what the community values and prioritizes in their work. So who should you involve? Our take on it at the Institute is really identify anyone who has a stake in the outcome. And this is very broad because we all eat. So we're all members of our food system in some capacity or another. And so it can take quite a bit of effort and engagement upfront to have these kind of community discussions, but it does pay off in the long run. When to involve people? There's different schools of thought on this. Generally, my experience is that the sooner that you involve people, so earlier in the process, the better, because people then, as I mentioned, feel that sense of ownership and are able to contribute. So you'll have fewer roadblocks, I guess, or people will have fewer issues with your process later on if you've involved them at the beginning, because they've kind of been involved all the way along. But this will really depend on the context of your community and what that will look like. And so likewise, how you involve people really depends on how your community is most comfortable engaging, and kind of what the typical ways are that people like to share information and ideas in your community. The photos on the slide there are some work that I did in Clyde River in Nunavut a long time ago. And up there, the radio was kind of the way that people communicate and engage. So that was us at the radio station doing a radio show to talk about the issues. In your community, it might be, talking circles, or maybe there's a community meal or other existing kind of community gatherings that you could tie into. It'll look different depending on your community. The kind of traditional, typical means of planning engagement for official community plans and that kind of thing would be open houses and surveys, but those are all very linear and from a certain way of knowing. So that might not be the best format for engaging in your community. Nowadays, youth and social media, there's all kinds of other digital means of engagement as well, which might be good for reaching certain components of your community, but maybe not elders who might not be plugged into those formats. So giving some thought to what the most effective means of reaching people would be and how to do that is important. So as I mentioned, you would be the expert in this and would know what would work best. But the important part is making the effort to reach out and really listen to what people are saying too. It may mean, and this is often a challenge for me because I like to be in control of things, but it may mean letting go of your preconceived ideas of where you think you'll end up, depending on what people give you in the process. So really it's a collaborative process to define where is it that we're going and where do we want to be with our food system. So as I mentioned, it's important not to underestimate the amount of time and effort that the planning process can take. In local government contexts, these can be year-long processes sometimes, or even more than that, and with a significant resources invested and a lot of upfront effort. But as I mentioned, that pays dividends when it comes to the actual results and outcomes that you're hoping to see. Generally, the process will go smoothly, more smoothly than if that work hadn't been done. And it's important too, once you have a plan drafted, to not be wedded to the plan. So nothing ever actually goes according to plan, even though you have a plan. So being able to revisit it and adapt that plan on a regular basis is important as well. And that requires, being intentional about that and saying, are we still on track? What has changed? And where do we maybe need to adapt what it was that we were hoping to achieve? And so there's a couple of resources that actually Calista shared these with me, and they're great resources around planning specifically for food systems in Indigenous contexts. And so the first would be the Food Security Toolkit, which the First Nations Health Authority shared, which has some worksheets and considerations. It's quite a bit briefer than the second reference, which is very comprehensive. The second one, the Food Sovereignty Assessment Tool, has a lot of great surveys and exercises that will lead you through considering food sovereignty in your community and what that looks like. There's also some good resources on planning and drafting plans and that kind of thing in there. So this is a really useful resource as well, that you can kind of take off the shelf and then see what will fit and what will apply in your community context as well.
And I just want to add that I've put the links to both of these documents in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah.
For folks.
That's great. Did Meredith ever join?
Yes, I'm here.
Yay. Great. Welcome, Meredith.
Let's start. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for starting this.
So I guess problem.
This leads us into...
Yeah, I think we're ready for you. I haven't introduced you other than to give your name, so feel free to introduce yourself to folks as well.
Sweet. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your interest in this topic. And it's an honor to be one of the presenters. My name is Meredith Papazzi. I'm one of the Indigenous Food Waste Coordinators at the Institute of Sustainable Food Systems. Hi, Calista. Calista used to be the other Indigenous Food Waste Coordinator. I really miss working with her, but it's great to see you on the screen, see your face.
You too.
Awesome. So yeah, I guess a bit about myself as well. I'm a mixed Indigenous person. My mom is a second generation settler from England, and my father is Inuit from the Kikitalik region, from Pangertung on Baffin Island. And then prior to that, my father's side of the family lived in Inukjuak, which is northern Quebec. And I'm joining you guys here from so-called Richmond, which is the unceded territory of the Musqueam First Nation. So let's dive right into what I would like to share with you all today. I guess, Christy, do you mind kind of driving the slides for this, we'll just start with the Musqueam example, I think would make the most sense.
Yeah, it's all up and ready to go.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Maybe. Oh, okay. Excellent. I see.
Can you see it there?
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So I figured it'd be really great to share the success stories from our Indigenous partners that we work with. The Institute has, I guess, three more robust Indigenous partnerships with 3 different First Nations. And so I figured it'd be a great place to show some case studies and some examples of what planning can look like, because it is very different between each nation, each band, et cetera, each community. So I just wanted to start off with the Musqueam IR4 plan. So the Musqueam First Nation developed a proposal for a farm development plan, and that was to determine the feasibility of the operation of a small-scale community farm. And this proposal is just a simple 4-page document. It's not an official plan, but rather it's a plan for a plan or a proposal for a plan. And the proposal is meant to use to apply for funds to create a larger, more detailed plan or feasibility plan for food security initiatives for the community. So proposals for a development plan, they don't need to go into a lot of detail, but it's ideal to have the following, which would be background and context of the organization or community or First Nation, as well as the background and context of any partners or consultants that you may be working with. I've found that a lot of grants want to know, who are you working with? Who are your partners? Who are your consultants? And they really like to see that broken down. As well as it's good to identify the scope and objectives of the development plan. So that's the proposal side of things. Like I said, you don't need to go into a whole lot of detail for that. But things to consider when you're working on a proposal, as it is a first step to access the larger pots of money for developing a more detailed plan. But when developing the proposal, it's good to keep in mind that you may need to include some more robust things in your food security plan. So it's good to be prepared to have an introduction. So that's just outlining the mission, the goals, or the vision of the operation of the proposed project. It's good to have a community needs analysis. So this is where the community and stakeholders share their goals and needs. A site assessment is ideal if you are going to be having some sort of farm or plot or community garden. So that could be things like the soil, physical and chemical properties, the soil health, any modifications that need to happen, or any recommendations of any modifications. It's also nice to include a market analysis. So this focuses on the feasibility of the project. So that would be things like market demand and any sort of economic opportunities that could come from that project, as well as have an idea of initial capital costs. So that would be just outlining the initial startup costs of establishing the farm or garden site or whatever food security project. It doesn't need to include the operating costs, but it's good to define the permanent installments, those larger pieces. So that could be like prepping the land, maybe perimeter fencing or machinery or any sort of large equipment or infrastructure or greenhouses that you would need to start up the farm site if that's part of your goal. It's also good to keep in mind that you want to include information about your operation. So that would be details of the entire operation, which includes site prep, perhaps crop production, livestock management if you want to have livestock, as well as the logistics of any training or education program as well. And it's also ideal to include net revenue projections just to show that you have a long-term goal of being a self-sustaining project. And that can be like a 5-year projection down the road. It doesn't need to be right away, but it's always nice to have that. And also a way to measure your operation performance. So this would be thinking of or establishing indicators to measure the success of the project. So that can include like monetary success or non-monetary evaluations. And all of those points are something that was listed in the Musqueam proposal, that was listed as something that they wanted to get funding for, to find the answers to those questions and develop those points to then go for further funding. But like I mentioned, the Musqueam proposal plan is a great example that you can look for pots of funding to create a larger plan. You don't have to go into a lot of detail. It's pretty not low effort, but you don't need a lot of capacity or a lot of time to develop a proposal. And then you can use that to apply for more funding to create a more robust plan. All right, so that brings us to the next example that I'd like to share from one of our partners, which is the Houston example. So if you don't mind, Christy, if you could just, excellent, thank you. So the Houston revitalization plan is something that the ISFS supported Houston with. It's an example, this is a great example that you can apply for funds to develop a plan once again. And this is an example that they've received the funds to develop a larger feasibility plan or to develop a larger revitalization plan. And then they were able to use that to access different pots of money. So often large grants will have two streams. Sometimes stream one can be a smaller funding opportunity, and that's designed to develop a plan. And then the second stream would be to implement the plan. So the Houston Revitalization Plan, it's a 70-page document. It's quite involved, and it took about 7 months to complete. And it was developed through extensive community engagement. The plan focuses on education, cultural revitalization, and capacity building alongside food production and revenue generation. And it also includes plans for staff, infrastructure requirements, supplies, budgets, prospective crop plans. And so the ISFS worked with the community to identify what Houston wanted to achieve before anything else happens. And this kind of goes back to Christy saying, it's the sooner you have community input, the sooner you have stakeholder input, the better, because then you can start to form your plan around what the community wants to see and what they have the capacity to deliver on. So through the revitalization plan, Houston has applied for multiple grants, multiple funding streams to develop the community's farm, as well as other food security initiatives. So since then, Houston has established the 5-acre farm. They have a cooler, a wash station, a greenhouse, irrigation, sea can storage, an accessible community plot for elders, which is really awesome, as well as they're developing a traditional food waste project to further Indigenous food sovereignty in the territory. And so this is, once again, a great example of the benefits of taking the time to secure funding for a larger long-term project plan and how that can benefit multiple security initiatives, food security initiatives. So this would almost be like the second step to what Musqueam's proposal is outlining. And then the next example that I'd like to share is sharing the success of one of our partners, Sikidach. They're one of our oldest partners, and Callista worked with them as well. And they're a really great example of diversifying their food security initiatives to broaden the potential funding streams. So they have a core master plan, and that can be strategically adapted for multiple grant applications by emphasizing its distinct fundable components. So for example, the farm school program that Sikidach, that we help support, that we run for Sikidach, the program not only advances the food security by training members, creating capacity, but is also a great avenue to apply for education, capacity building, that sort of scope through those funds, but it also benefits the food security of the nation. So by highlighting this specific element, for example, like youth and adult training for the same foundational food security project, Sikidach can leverage plans to apply for grants focused on education. They can leverage plans for workforce development, social capacity, also in addition to agriculture and food security funding. So this is a great way to just broaden and really think about, like, outside of food security, what are our plans delivering on? So it's good to think about if your food systems projects can transcend food, as food connects to all of these aspects. Food links to every aspect of community well-being, culture, and tradition. It's great to think outside of that box a bit to then see if you can find or access different pots of funding that may seem a bit more laterally related to then support your food sovereignty initiatives. And so some examples of diversified funding avenues that could really link to a core food security initiative, that can be things like education and youth development, workforce development and training, public health and nutrition, community and economic development, environmental stewardship, and also cultural and heritage revitalization. Yeah, and so I'll just carry us through the rest of the slides here. And I just wanted to talk on how to learn from grant webinars and successful applications. So I love webinars. I'm involved in finding funding and connecting funding opportunities for Indigenous partners and the relationships that we've built. And webinars are a great way to get information about grants or prepare for grants. But what I like to look at is first and foremost past successful relationships or past successful applications. So I like to see what was approved for funding. Is there any alignment, or is that area already funded? Should I think about a different avenue or different scope to apply for a grant? I like to look at the webinars as well. And oftentimes webinars are recorded. Oftentimes the funders will have the slides still. So if you missed a webinar, which can happen, you can always reach out to the grant representatives or the funder representatives, ask for the slides or ask for the webinar recording, and just glean any information from there. Another great thing to look at is the grant application form themselves. So what we often do is, before we even go into a lot of the details, we'll just look at the grant application form, maybe take a picture of it, save it, and then that lists out like all of the questions that they're asking, and then you can prepare for that. Also, another good thing to look at is the evaluation criteria. So in every grant program, they typically lay out the criteria for evaluation. So when you prepare for a grant, you can apply and you can plan and convey it in ways that ideally ticks all the boxes of the evaluation criteria. So you can look at the funding application. And so, for example, like if the delivery plan and the work plan make up 50% of the scoring for the grant application or for the funds, then you know to spend more time on that. So it's a really good thing to look at the criteria that they will evaluate you on. And yeah, another thing as well, I like to just go through a little grant readiness checklist. So just ensure you have your core planning documents, you've done community engagement, you have your budget and sustainability project projection, you're aligned with the funder or aligned with the funds, and you have the capacity to deliver. So your core planning documents could be a community needs assessment, a project summary, a budget, those main things that convey your vision and your goals of the project. Another important thing is community engagement. Grants always want to see that. They want to see feedback. They want to see the community's vision. They want to see the input from diverse community members all across the board. It's also good to include the budget and sustainability projection. So that could be things like budget for staff, budget for infrastructure, budget for establishment, as well as the budget of operating costs. And then also identify potential revenue strategies down the road to be self-sustaining eventually. And then for the alignment with the funder, it's always good to double check, does your project align with the funding opportunity? Does the project impact numerous areas? If so, it's great to identify that and highlight that, and perhaps you can recycle or rinse and repeat different plans for different funding opportunities. And really the capacity to deliver, that's quite important. And it's good to show your implementation strategy and your management recommendations. You want to provide a clear roadmap for the funders on how you will deliver. So exemplify the capacity of consultants, exemplify the capacity of your partners, exemplify the capacity of the folks working on the project, and also identify the appropriate collaborators if needed. As a community, you might not have all of the capacity you want or need to achieve something, so you should identify the appropriate partners that you would want to work with at this point. And yeah, so just collaboration and next steps. We're always open. This is the work we do. This is the work that we're honored to do, and we appreciate and love to do it. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to us, either myself or Christy or Kent or Wallapak, the directors, as we have a very diverse, tight-knit team that can help deliver support to meet your food sovereignty goals. The ISFS team, as Christy mentioned, there's planners, agrologists, agriculturalists, grant writers, Indigenous foodway coordinators. So we're always happy to help. And another great resource is Peer Connection. Look for Indigenous-led food system groups. I'm sure Callista has some great resources and great events and great gatherings that you can all get together and just discuss these things amongst yourselves and just get familiar with the process and just learn from each other. As well as resources. So there's planning toolkits, grant application forms are a great resource. Like I said, just look at the application form. You can usually access it online, and also look at the funding timeframe so you know to be prepared, because sometimes things really sneak up on you and you're like, oh my gosh, the grant application is closing in like 5 days. I need to get it together. But it's nice to have a projection of the timeframes as things move along. And of course, reach out to us for support. I saw that Callista put in the chat some really good resources, so I definitely recommend to look at those. Yeah, and that's basically it. I better plug in my computer because it's at pretty low percentage here, but that's really all I had to share with you guys. Thank you so much for listening and for your interest, and I really wish you all the best of luck to apply for grants. I know it's a lot of work. I know planning is a lot of work, but from the short time that I've been in this role, I really see it pays off to plan well and connect with others and build those relationships. And like I said, I can't stress it enough. We're always here for support and to consult with you all. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Meredith and to Christy. Yeah, I have maybe just like a few like tidbits to offer at the end here, and we can also open it up to questions and discussion. A couple of key points, like in the planning process, whatever way you decide to go, and even if at this point it's just like starting out with that visioning piece, or whether it's getting it, into the nitty-gritty details of like a really comprehensive plan, it's so important to make sure that you are involving everyone who could potentially be impacted or reliant or involved with this food system in that process. I've spent a fair amount of my career also doing permaculture design and stuff for food systems as well. And I just know that it's so important to have everybody at the table, because it creates an immense amount of buy-in. Everyone feels like they've contributed and their voice has been heard and their thoughts and their ideas have been incorporated, and it just creates so much more support and a more cohesive like community, basically, that all revolve around this food system. And food's central to all the communities. Like Christy said, it's like one of those things that's shared across everybody's radar, right? We all need food. It's a basic need. So when everybody feels like they've been involved and their voice has been heard and their ideas have been incorporated and their values have been incorporated, then you create a system that everybody is keen to support. And that creates a lot more like long-term success, right? All right. So the big, I don't know, Christy didn't talk too much about like cost and stuff and resources, and it can vary a lot. For like some of those big comprehensive plans, it gets, the dollar amounts when you're involving somebody else gets pretty hefty. So like our little grant is not a lot. It's enough to kind of get you started, or if you've already kind of started, can get you like to kind of like a little bit of a step 2, where you're developing a little bit more of a comprehensive amount of information. And like there are lots of great resources out there that you can utilize for free to help with that. There are also some amazing consultants out there, and I know the ISFS has a whole onslaught of tools and expertise that they can offer as well. And so, like if you have a set amount that you want to utilize for that purpose, you can go to them and say like, what can we get to with this amount or whatever. So there are lots of resources out there. And I'm so glad, Francesca. Thank you for putting that in there. Yay. That's like, I know we don't have a lot. We have to spread it across the whole province. So it's just little tidbits, but we just are really hoping to empower folks to be able to access more funding. And maybe at some point we'll get up a little bit more. I'm working my buns off trying to make that happen for future years down the road. But anyway, so I think we could open it up to questions and discussion. So if you have something, just feel free to unmute yourself. And there's not so many people, so I'm hoping it'll be relatively relatively not too chaotic. I see there also, if you would rather put it in the chat, you're welcome to do that too. So Rose, I see you had put a couple of questions in the chat there. Okay, so you're asking how much you should target to submit for like a grant application for planning purposes. It's really hard to give you a number. What I would suggest is you need to figure out what type of a planning process it is that you are wanting to conduct. And if it's over our $5,000 cap, then you need to maybe reach out to somebody like the Institute for Sustainable Food Systems or some other consultant who does food systems planning pieces and ask them for an estimate on how much it would cost to create a plan that you're looking for. Okay. Does anybody else have questions?
Hi.
Hi.
It's Francesca. I'm just wondering, I think I heard early in the presentation. First of all, thanks so much for bringing us together and getting our juices flowing for this upcoming call. I think I heard that the funding, whether it's the 3,000 or the 5, can be used towards this planning, like doing planning. The speaker said it took 7 months to do, which would probably carry over beyond the March. So did I get that wrong, or what is the...
Oh, so Christy's talking about a more comprehensive plan. Absolutely.
Okay.
That will take much more time than we have the ability to accommodate in our granting period. For our small little grant that we have, the planning that you probably would be able to undertake with this is more of that like visioning and goal setting piece. Unless you've already got like a pretty comprehensive piece around that, you could maybe start digging into details for like a smaller project or something like that. So that's definitely something that needs to be considered. The like more comprehensive plan stuff do take a lot more time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
More time than we would have.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Workshops are always well received in the village. You know, we just want to make sure that we're falling in line with the guidelines.
Absolutely.
For that 3K, I'm just wondering, does anybody have any examples of workshops that have gone well in community?
Food preservation workshops always go over well. Everybody loves those. And we have, you know, many projects in the program that are very successful with those and have, you know, great attendance. So there's, food processing workshops, foraging workshops. So depending on where you are, like it's mushroom season in the fall for some folks, that's always a good one. Medicine making sometimes goes over really well. And
Thank
some other ideas, like there is a list, Sonia has put a list of ideas on the website
Okay.
for the grant. But some other ideas are things like hunting and fishing camps, or, you know, teachings where we're bringing elders and youth together. Some other things are like crop planning, right? Like for the next year, or garden planning, garden design. How are you going to plan out your crop rotations? What seeds are you going to order? Are you going to be seed saving? So then that dictates another piece of, you know, like, so crop planning can be pretty intensive too. It could be seed starting, because that, you know, for some people happens in January or February. So that's an early spring activity that can take place. Another idea that we had too, it's getting a little late in the season. By the time we get actual funds out, probably will be November sometime. But there was some ideas around having like a harvest feast where there's also like an education component. So that's another piece that we would certainly support, where communities are gathering and you know, trading their goods, and you know, offering knowledge as part of that event too. So there are, you know, there's lots of different options. I could go on. There is a list on there, and we're certainly open to other ideas as well.
Thank you. That's helpful.
We do have a question from Peter in the chat about the format of engagement sessions. Are you talking more like iSpark engagement sessions or past that?
I was kind of thinking past that, but it also occurs to me that it may not have been you folks actually doing that work. So if it's hard to answer that question, don't worry about it.
I guess I could speak to that a little bit, and hopefully answer some questions. If not, I've tried my best. But I guess, so you're asking the format. Let me just share more about the format of the engagement sessions. So it can look really different, kind of like what Christy was saying. It really depends on like the community's capacity, what folks are comfortable with, accessibility, that sort of thing. But in the past, when the ISFS has done engagement sessions, you always want to make sure that it's implemented in a culturally safe way. So that can be involving group conversations, one-on-one sessions. It can look like hosting information booths, as well as just any sort of social media engagement. I think Christy was mentioning too that in her work before working with the ISFS, that they would engage the community on the radio, because that's what that's what was normal up there. And so it can look really different. Oftentimes it's good to have a budget for honoraria for people participating, for elders participating. It's also good to have a budget for hosting some feasts or hosting some dinners, just to get everybody together and engaged, share some food together, and just discuss the visions and the hopes, potentially challenges, share current realities from the community as well, and just help that inform your plan. And so it really depends on the community, but oftentimes the ISFS, like for us, an Indigenous food waste coordinator or an agrologist, whoever's working on the project, would go to community. They'd host a couple of engagement events. So like I said, that can look different depending on the needs or capacity or the accessibility of the community. And then, yeah, it can really look different, but typically we go up there in person a couple times a year. We want to get that input at the start of the plan, and then have that input help us form the rest of the plan as we go along. And typically, from my experience, it looks like community dinners are a great place to have a presentation, talk about your project, get community input. You can have an information booth, you can put it on the radio, social media, that sort of thing. But I guess that it really depends what you see the strengths of communication within your community. Oh, and I see Christy had something to say.
Oh, and now it's leaving me again. Oh, yes. One format that can work quite well as well is training and hiring community members to be kind of engagement representatives or ambassadors, I guess, if you have a specific project. So maybe that involves going door to door, going to community events, but so that you're building, and I'm not sure the context that you're coming from as well. You know, when we've got, often we're kind of external consultants, and so really empowering and encouraging the nation to build capacity internally through that. So kind of mentoring these kind of engagement officer is a terrible term, but engagement positions within the community. And sometimes these can be maybe youth or depending on the audiences that you're wanting to reach. That's another way to go about things that can keep the money kind of circling within the community and build capacity at the same time. And as Callista mentioned, like winter is not a bad time to be doing this. It's kind of if we're talking about agriculture and growing things, it's kind of the quieter season. So it's a good time to reflect and take stock. And so having these kind of community events and feasts or dinners where we can come together and talk about kind of what aspirations might be in the winter is kind of a good thing, I think, in terms of seasonally where it fits and things. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you, Christy.
I might even have a piece to add to that too. Just having worked with Stikadach as well when I was with KPU, but a lot of the engagement in that particular relationship occurred over Zoom because we were delivering presentation or training to them via Zoom, and there was a great deal of time spent at the beginning of the year, you know, engaging with the students, the trainees, and the mentors that have been in the program for several years about what their needs and wants were and where their interests lied, so that we were kind of tailoring some of those pieces to what the community wanted and needed.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah. So engagement comes in many different ways. And you know, the winter time is such a great time, not just from an agricultural perspective, but also just from a traditional perspective, because, you know, during the summer months, there's lots of travel and you're doing all of the food processing and hunting and fishing. And the winter typically is the time of year when traditionally people would have, you know, held space together and kind of holed up, if you will. But, you know, that was when a lot of those teachings and planning and you know, like traditional ways of communicating and storytelling all took place kind of in those colder months. So for sure, that's not a bad time of year to do it.
Very, very nice and interesting.
Callista, this is Ken. I'd like to add that anytime the ISFS has worked to support an Indigenous community, it's always started with a community champion, and we would first connect with a community champion would first connect with us and ask how we could support moving a vision or a project forward. And if that includes substantial community engagement, then we always take the lead of the community and talk to the groups of people, the individuals that that are suggested that we talk to and consult. So as Meredith suggested, elders and leaders and youth leaders and foodways, knowledge keepers, etc. And but it's always different for every community, and it's how the community wants to engage, and but typically it all emanates from a community champion who has an idea of what kind of support or assistance is needed, and if it's engagement, then that engagement has to come from the lead of the community itself. This is, as Meredith suggested, this is how the community wants to be engaged, how they want to communicate their ideas and their feelings.
Thanks, Kent. Does anybody have any other burning questions they would like to ask or comments they'd like to share? I see Matthew just joined on now from Houston. We were talking about you and you weren't even here.
I apologize. I had a late meeting before lunch and I totally forgot. It's been a crazy week this week. So
sorry, Matthew. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. All right. Well, if nobody has anything else, then I would like to close our webinar and thank everyone for coming, and especially thank the folks from the ISFS from presenting and joining us today and sharing their wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Calista. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
the folks out there. Yeah, thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.